There is an international agreement in space above 100 kilometers. There are no national territories. It's no wonder then that there's a lot of cooperation within the international space community there, right now. Let's bring in my final guest of the program. Dr. Jessica Watkins is part of the 2017 NASA Astronaut Candidate Class. She's worked at NASA's Ames Research Center and Jet Propulsion Laboratory and was a collaborator for NASA's Mars Science Laboratory rover, Curiosity. I should tell people that I talked to people about Curiosity, and Curiosity was a she. Avi Blasberger is Director General of the Israel Space Agency. He's leading the agency's 100% electric propulsion system initiative, as well as growing partnerships with India and countries in Africa. It's great to have you both here. We've been having fun talking about space. I usually talk about stuff that's much closer to the planet Earth and to whatnot, but this has been a fun program. And let me just start with you, with our astronaut, Jessica Watkins. I've talked to a lot of astronauts over my career, and I'm interested in what has drawn you into this.
Yes, so thanks for having me, first of all. I'm excited to be a part of this important conversation. For me in particular, I first got interested in the idea of being an astronaut when I went to an elementary school, to an enrichment program at an elementary school named after Judith Resnick. And I remember I must have asked my parents, who she was and about her legacy and her story. And I think that was kind of the first time that I realized that you could do this as a job. You could go to space. You could, explore the universe on your own. And I definitely wanted to find out how to follow that path from that moment.
Was it easy for you or tough? And I mean easy in this sense, was the pathway natural and laid out? For women of color, was this, we're kind of looking at these questions about inclusiveness in this country. And I just want to be very real. I'm so proud, so happy you're there. But the question is everything in place, or did you have to overcome a lot of obstacles as you got into the program?
Yeah, so for me, I think, the pathway was not always super clear, but I think in part because there is no one pathway to get here, which took me a while to realize or understand, quite honestly. And so I think for me, where some of my harder times or more of my struggles getting to this point were along the pathway that I thought I had to take in order to get where I wanted to go. So I went into my undergraduate wanting to be a mechanical engineer, not necessarily because I had a passion for it or because I had some experience that had led me to that, but because that's what I thought that I needed to do in order to keep that door open and that dream alive. And once I got to school, started taking classes in engineering, I just found that, like I said, it was just not something that I was passionate about. So I really had to sit down and kind of, decide for myself whether it was worth finding something that I really was truly passionate about and pursuing that, hopefully keeping the door open, but knowing that if that wasn't the possibility, that it was more important to me to follow my dreams in terms of doing something that I truly loved and something that really got me out of bed in the morning every day, versus doing what I thought I needed to do in order to have the possibility of achieving this, way far off possibility. So I think for me, the lesson in that was really finding my own pathway and making sure that I was doing something that really, truly fulfilled me every day.
It's very impressive. And Avi, I guess one of the things I'm interested in is, I've been to Israel and it's just filled with so many innovators in tech. I remind people Waze came from Tel Aviv and others. You look at the space program's technology. The UAE is now, like Israel in certain ways, hitting above its weight. It's brought together and, invested in human capital and talent. You don't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to send up a Hope Mars probe and do this. There takes a lot of work. I'm interested from you about what the social contract in science and space needs to be successful as you have been in Israel.
First of all, the Israeli program started from a need. It started from the defense side because we needed an observation satellite. So at the beginning, it was a need. But afterward, when we acquired all the facilities and all the human resources, all the background, Then space become natural to do science, engineering, technology. And since space is a very multidisciplinary area, it's very natural for Israel engineering and science to go into this area.
How have you brought young people into your program? We're talking to Jessica, and she got brought in, and she reminds me of a lot of young people who came in through science or special tracks inspired by someone. But I know that you have some very explicit programs where high school students and whatnot have actually helped design Israeli satellites. Tell us a little bit about what you've tried to do with your own youth.
So first of all, as Jessica said, space inspires young people. So if it is inspiring young people, then you can use that to improve STEM in general, meaning that you can bring more young people to science, technology, engineering, mathematics. In particular, we have a program in Israel that to build a small CubeSat, 1U CubeSat in high school students. Actually, we have now 8 high school students together build 8 satellites that will be launched very soon together. And the program was to teach them about space science, space engineering, and at the end of the day, they had a project that they build a satellite with their own hands.
Fascinating. Jessica, one of the things I raised with Haza Al-Mansouri, the UAE's athlete, I don't know if you know each other, fascinating discussion with him earlier, is that most of the scientists that I had known that went to work at like American national security labs, like Sandia National Labs or Los Alamos or others, they were scientists in addition to being astronauts. So I'm interested in what your questions are that you're interested in. What sorts of fields of science and whatnot are you interested in pursuing in addition to the work of, getting up there?
Yeah, we actually, all of us here in the Astronaut Corps and the International Astronaut Corps as well, all come from different backgrounds, some scientific, some engineering, some more focused on the aviation side. But for me, I come from a geology background. So I was kind of talking about my pathway to get here and finding something that I truly loved. And for me, that was geology. And it turns out that geology was actually what enabled me to study Mars. So my graduate work was on Mars, and then I went on to work on the Mars rover, the Curiosity rover. As you mentioned earlier on, before coming out to Houston. And so for me, this idea of certainly working on Mars is always very interesting to me, will always be near and dear to my heart. But the idea of scientists and engineers working together to really achieve the impossible and to really, gain the most data that we possibly can is really exciting. And so I'm super excited about the Perseverance rover that's going to be landing on Thursday, as well as the UAE Mars probe, as well as the Chinese Martian probe as well. It's just an exciting time for Mars, and as a planetary geologist, it's an exciting time for me.
Are you in the line possibly to go up with the Artemis program?
We'll see. Yes, I'm part of the Artemis team, and so all of us are working really hard to lay the foundation for the Artemis program and are super excited about getting boots back on the moon.
Thank you for that. Avi, tell us a little bit more about the next steps in your program. What are the objectives for Israel's space program now? What are the the next frontier of the kinds of things that Israel's trying to achieve? And also, I'd like to ask you too is, what do you think about the health of international partnerships right now? Are they improving, worsening? What's that scene like?
I think that you said in the beginning that over 100 kilometers, the cooperation or collaboration is better. It could be seen on the ISS, of course, that ISS belong to the United States, Canada, to the European, Japanese, and Russian. So, and they are collaborating over there. The space collaboration is, or what we call also space diplomacy, is very strong. I think almost every respected space agency has a lot of space cooperation with other agencies. For us, of course, we are having a strong cooperation with NASA, with the European Space Agency, with the French, with the German, Italian, Indian, you name it. And currently we are working on a space agreement with the UAE. So you see, one of the first, after having the Abraham Accords, one of the first things that Israel and the UAE are doing is to try to cooperate in space program. So space program is a very good ground for cooperation to do joint science and joint technology together.
Well, thank you for that. We're taking questions from the audience, and we have one for you folks from Carolyn Ruggieri. Carolyn?
My question is about healthcare research in zero gravity settings. I was just wondering if all of you could provide your thoughts on the current status of healthcare research and also future opportunities in this area within zero gravity settings. Thanks.
What a terrific question, Caroline. I wish I'd thought of that. You want to start, Jessica?
Sure, absolutely. Yes, so there is certainly quite a bit of what we are doing in space, in microgravity, that transfers to our understanding and knowledge that continues our understanding in the medical field as well as many others, as you know, astrophysics, biology, et cetera. And so for the medical side in particular, one thing that comes to mind is that we have learned and are just starting to hone in our process of how to sequence DNA in space. Dr. Kate Rubins was the first to do that a couple of years ago, and just the other week she was up there doing it again. And from those types of experiments, we can learn new things about how molecules move and grow and build, and that we can apply that knowledge, extrapolate that knowledge down to a 1D environment here on Earth, and we can learn a lot more about how viruses interact and how we can work to eradicate them. So a lot of what we're doing up on the International Space Station has lots of applications for making life better here on Earth.
Thank you for that. Avi, your thoughts on health and what opportunities there are in space-based scientific research?
One another example is that materials are crystallizing differently under microgravity than on gravity on Earth. So there are a lot of experiments how to crystallize different materials that you cannot crystallize them here on Earth, and having new means, new medicine or other materials that you would manufacture them in space in the future.
That's fascinating. Just let me, I love this discussion. I'm just going to sneak one last thing here. You know, we heard the UAE Minister of State for Advanced Technologies, chair of the UAE Space Agency, Sarah Amiri, talk about the private sector, the importance of building private sector partnerships and private sector capacity. And, you know, both of you, I guess, technically work for the governments you're in, I guess. How do you think what are the best and promising practices of dealing with the private sector? Because one of the things that came up in this youth study that we did is interested in jobs, right? So you can have your interest in space, it's also an interest in jobs. And so I'm just interested in any quick reflections you may have, Jessica and Avi, on what the contours of really healthy partnerships. We see what SpaceX is doing, we see what Virgin Galactic is doing. You know, what are your insights on that? Jessica?
So
Sure, I'll take that one first really quick. Go ahead, Avi.
Go ahead, Avi.
Go ahead.
I steered traffic badly. Avi first, and we'll finish with Jessica.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So first of all, the private sector is doing very good. This is a fact. And our role is to support them and to let them grow, not to take work for the government. This is on one hand. On the other hand, the government still has the role to do the edge of technology and science, which the private sector will use in the future and not today. So many things that have been done with the government 20 years ago now can be done with the private sector. Also, if you look at the aviation sector, for example, in the beginning of the aviation sector, everything was done by the governments. Today, everything is done by the private sector. Hopefully, in the future, more and more will be done in space, but by the private sector. And yet, there is still the edge of science, the edge of technology will be always supported by the government.
Terrific. Jessica, I'm going to give you the last word.
All right, thank you. I certainly agree with everything that Avi mentioned. You know, it's certainly the idea of coming together with the private sector and really having kind of a best of both worlds. So, you know, the private sector brings a lot to the table in terms of, you know, just a different risk posture and an ability to move more efficiently and faster and cheaper in a lot of senses, in a lot of instances. And then the government agency, NASA in this case, comes with the years of experience and ability to, implement some of the infrastructure and training and those types of things that have been established over time. But if we can bring both of those strengths to the table and learn to, work together and exploit that, well, not exploit has a negative connotation, but use them both to their highest potential, we end up in a situation where we are all set up for success. And then we can turn over some of that to the private sector. And then that, as Avi kind of mentioned, frees up the government to pursue exploration further into the solar system, like we are hoping to do with the Artemis program, back to the moon and eventually to Mars.
Well, listen, I want to thank you. And I should acknowledge to everybody, I'm addicted to this TV show called The Expanse. They're belters and inners and Mars and all of this. And I don't know, Avi, if you've seen it, but it's a great show. But in it, you've now made very, very real. And it's fascinating to look at what we're all achieving in a way and kind of make this available to hear for so many other people who are watching right now. So Jessica Watkins, Dr. Jessica Watkins, a NASA astronaut, thank you so much for joining us. Avigdor Avi Blasberger, Director General of Israel's Space Agency. I hope you'll both come back as you both make further steps forward. I love this topic, and I think it's important for people to hear about it. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end of our program today. A big thank you to the Embassy of the United Arab Emirates in Washington, D.C. for its support of this program and the series, and to all of you in the audience for joining us. For those of you who missed any of these conversations, either this one or any of the ones we've had before, we're going to have all this up on our event website shortly. I'm Steve Clemons. Watch the new Space Age. Be well.